Today I'm going to share today I'm going to share some of our findings on the Cincinnati-based piece of the Climate Safe Neighborhoods, or CSN project. Climate Safe Neighborhoods is a national effort through Groundwork USA to identify neighborhoods that are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change because of racial or social injustices, engage frontline resident leaders and partners, and ignite action towards climate resilience. CSN explores the relationship between historically race-based housing segregation and the current and predicted impacts of climate change. But before we get started today, as a step towards honoring the truth and achieving healing and reconciliation with those Indigenous peoples who are affected most by the doctrine of discovery and broken treaties, I acknowledge the traditional Shawnee and Mia Mia lands on which I now stand as a guest and on which the city of Cincinnati was built. When speaking about government and organizational approaches to climate equity in communities, it's important to consider the inherent strengths and wisdom that are already present. As we found throughout our project, community members know better than anyone else what their community needs. But y'all are community psychologists, so you already know that. A master's student who worked on this project for her thesis defined climate equity in this context as acknowledging and addressing the disproportionate effects of climate change that are rooted in the historic and systemic oppression of communities of color and low-income communities. The Climate Safe Neighborhoods Project seeks to bring resources, knowledge, and power to neighborhoods with a history of disinvestment, to co-create a culture of connection and engagement while tackling projects that bring equity to the community as a whole. These photos are from a community tree planting event in Lower Price Hill, the first neighborhood in Cincinnati to take part in the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Project. As a part of CSN, communities and organizations co-created a series of climate resiliency plans for the neighborhoods of Lower Price Hill, Roselawn, and Bond Hill. These maps show proposals that the community members decided on based on residents' desires for their neighborhood and the ideas presented to them by project team members. Interesting features to note are the locations marked with the red X to be turned into cooling bus shelters for hot summer days, orange community gardens to expand food sovereignty, and the green dots for proposed places to add street trees in an effort to reduce the heat island effect, the effect that areas with too much asphalt and not enough green spaces can experience, which can cause an area to feel much hotter than the rest of a city. For this part of the study, our team was responsible for processing the interview accounts of community members from previously highlighted neighborhoods who were a part of a climate advisory group, also known as a CAG or the CAG, and project team members, which included people from the city of Cincinnati, the Regional Climate Collaborative Green Umbrella, and the environmental justice nonprofit Groundwork Ohio River Valley, which is a part of Groundwork USA. As our team read through the transcripts, we coded them based off of a few research questions. The ones I have highlighted today are the ones we'll focus on predominantly. First, what were the actual impacts of the Climate Safe Neighborhoods project? Second, what were identified as the benefits and challenges of CSN? And third, what were the anticipated future impacts? Along the way, we added and recoded for two more questions, those being, what experiences and perspectives do the involved community members bring to the table? And who are the people involved in the CSN partnership and what brought them there? In total, we had about 9 hours and 33 minutes of transcriptions spread across 8 post-program interviews. We also coded footage from a post-program showcase. For today's purposes, we will be primarily focusing on the interviews from the CAG members from Roselawn and Bond Hill. Out of our 8 interviews, 3 were from community members who, as we'll see later, were already involved in community work before joining the CAG. The other 5 were from partner organizations that composed the project team, 1 from the city of Cincinnati, 1 from Green Umbrella, and 3 from Groundwork Ohio River Valley. In preparation to code, our team of 4 answered reflexivity questions fueled by our research questions to acknowledge and lean into the experiences and identities that helped shape who we were as researchers and what perspectives we held in approaching the transcripts. Some held identities involving relationships to the city as being raised in it, raised elsewhere in Ohio, or raised on the West Coast. We came from white and Asian families with cis and queer gender identities and differing research backgrounds from general and community psychology to media and sustainability studies. For the data analysis process, we used codebook thematic analysis using Braun and Clark's work as a guide. The transcripts were coded inductively by all team members individually. Then, during team meetings, we discussed what we were seeing and created a collective codebook along the way to help organize our thoughts to answer the research questions. The first research question to address is about the actual community impacts of, today I'll be primarily focusing on research questions 1, 2, and 4. I should clarify that. The first research question we're going to address is about the actual community impacts of the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership. And I'd like to highlight a theme that generated from this question: new perspectives of equity. This code refers to the relief of understanding yourself and the situation better. Megan, one of the community members who had experienced flooding problems in her neighborhood, was asked if she would have tied equity to climate change before the CAG and said, "No, I actually didn't even think of equity in the same aspect of climate change prior to this. There are some perspectives and attitudes that our community is fine. We're doing the best we can. But there are some things that were not equal to other neighborhoods, and that makes a difference." Realizing that flooding was caused by climate change, that was an opening for me, like, oh, that's why we weren't set up to be ready for something like that, or talking about our sewage. So that was helpful to see that there are some other pieces and components that fall into line about why we are where we are in our neighborhood. Not everyone felt more connected to the project as a result of the equity awareness training in the program. As Carol shared in her interview, I don't want to politicize it. I want it to be a question of, we have a problem, how can we fix it? And I'm not as interested in, how did this problem come to be? I'm interested in preventing it in the future. While you can raise people's hackles and get them all upset and feeling violated for past inequities, I would much prefer that we go at it as mentioned. We have a problem, and we, as all of us, can help fix it. So let's go do it. And not so much emphasis on bring them to action through an emotional response based on inequities, historical inequities, or whatever. Whether that's true or not, I don't think that's the way to go. I think that's a divisive way of approaching. Another related theme under this research question was leveraging knowledge, which refers to knowledge gained during the CAG meetings, whether they used their newly connected knowledge to boost their own environmental efforts or to find new tools to use in the future. To this idea, Paul expressed what he found useful in the CAG. I don't think the CAG meetings made climate change more urgent necessarily in my mind, because I already had some kind of urgency, but it did help me to see how it impacts my neighborhood and what can be done on a neighborhood level to create solutions. And so in a way, that might have created an additional urgency, because now I actually feel like I have some agency in doing something about it. Whereas before I was like, okay, reduce, reuse, recycle, but does that really impact anything? What effect is that having on a global level? I don't know. Whereas the CAG meetings made my whole concept of climate change a lot more tangible, if that makes sense. Carol partially agreed, but pointed to a feeling that the CAG didn't create a sense of urgency and action. I think that there were some people in our group that maybe found some tools in the process that they might have bumped into some ideas that might be useful to them now in the future. I don't think that the whole group was set on fire and now they're going to go out and proselytize about this. As I said, these things take time to develop and some people will never be interested. But I didn't sense that in our conversations in the meetings that, oh man, this is starting to spin and really pick up a lot of momentum. At the same time, youth members of the CAG expressed that the knowledge was not only helpful, but something that they could take with them in life. Well, at first I definitely felt a little bit intimidated because everybody else was an adult and they all had these different experiences and I didn't really have as much experience or knowledge as everyone else, so I was kind of down for a bit. But then I switched it around because I'm here to learn, I'm here to gain the knowledge like everybody else is about these problems as well. So it was just a good experience to be able to learn all these things with everybody else and to be able to maybe take this in the future to other places that I may be living. Another theme under this research question was increase of social networks, which is tied to social capital or connections tied to power. When asked if he felt better equipped to do his work after the CAG, Paul said, I would say yes, because of the people that I met at different partner organizations or at the city, because of my involvement in the CAG. I don't know that the CAG helped me to feel I have more skills or more ability to do this, but it did help me to meet the right people to do the work. The transcript speaks to the idea that while some benefited from the equity education that was included in the CAG process, for others, the primary aspects that had been slowing their progress were connections and resources, and that was their preferred area of focus. Before we switch research questions, I want to call out one theme under the actual impacts to the project team members, which was finding fulfillment. In speaking to the potential for expansion of this project, Sarah from the Green Umbrella shared, I'm really excited for continuing this work with Green Umbrella and Groundwork to hopefully expand this model outside of Cincinnati into jurisdictions in our region, because governments are asking for this. They want to know how to better connect with their constituents, and particularly constituents they haven't been able to connect with in a meaningful way yet. This idea that governments are feeling better connected to their constituents through the process was also supported by Matt from the city of Cincinnati, who expressed, "I would say that we always absolutely value the input of our community. However, the community that we hear from traditionally has been white and older. And the CAG really does help us get diverse voices and to hear from that lived experience. All of these different communities, they're not the ones that show up to our events. And we need to be honest about that. And we need to do things differently. And the climate safe neighborhoods is one way we're trying to do things differently." The next research question we're going to examine is the experiences and perspectives that the CAG members brought to the table. From this question, we generated the theme of deep involvement, which refers to CAG members' historical community involvement that is before or beyond climate safe neighborhoods. As a member of the community shared during the post-program showcase, that's where I was born and raised, and that's where my mom still lives. I'm at my mom's like half the week and it's cool because all my older neighbors that I grew up with on the street still live there. Before the CAG, some community members like Megan had been the beautification chair for their neighborhood, while others like Carol had been involved in multiple facets of neighborhood development, including grant writing. Because of their pre-existing community-led development activities, many people joined the CAG groups to gain more and more momentum behind what they were already doing. Another theme that was generated from this question was being a good ancestor. This phrase refers to thinking and feeling beyond your own life and taking responsibility for the future today. A CAG youth member summarized the idea well when they shared in the showcase that they would be leaving the neighborhood soon when they graduated high school, but they hope that their small little part in this group will be able to somehow benefit the people of the neighborhood, as well as the lives of people who live here in the future. When thinking about the future for her son, Megan shared, "It's not somebody else's issue or someone else's concern, but first and foremost, it's ours. It's not just about the neighborhood, it's also about the city, and more importantly, it's about Earth. And especially now, having a son, I'd love for him to live on Earth and not on Mars or any other planet. But let's take care of the one we have right now." Tyler, one of the team members from Groundwork Ohio River Valley on the project, had a supporting perspective to add to this theme when he shared, "I think the city always has a role to play and that they literally establish the zoning and the land use of the land we're on. So everything can start with them, but not everything can be finished by them." This points to the importance of community-led projects in tandem with city-level action and brings me into our next research question on examining the benefits and challenges of the program. One theme that was generated from this question was interacting with those in formal positions of power. Similar to the theme of social networks, but more directly targeting proximity to power and seeing institutional support. Tyler from the nonprofit added to this idea too when he said, "The most important part is resident voices being heard and residents' priorities acted upon." As a follow-up question, when asked if one of the goals of CSN is to form some sort of connection between community members in the city, he laughed and said, "Yeah, that's a huge goal, sneaky, sneaky thing. Just make them get into a room together, basically." We also found several challenges under the theme of equity in the community, which refers to suggestions for increasing equity in the CAG process. When asked about suggestions for the next CAG program, Matt, a member of the city's team, had a mixed response. "We talked about redlining. We talked about the racial impacts of neighborhood demographics, how they got the way they were, and how that impacts the environment that the community lives in. I feel that we're doing some things. There'll be tree planting and beautification and that sort of stuff, which is wonderful, but that's not going to solve the problem. It's going to take more." Matt shared a viewpoint that the CAG is working but needs to be added to and adjusted. While this was an idea shared by others, not all would agree. Some believe that instead of additions to the existing framework, that the ideas behind the CAG needed to be rewritten entirely. As Sonia, a team member from Groundwork, shared, "I want the GCP, or Green Cincinnati Plan, process to be more equitable from the get-go. Instead of starting with the same voices leading it, it should be led by residents from almost day one, if not earlier." Sonia's look at equity comes from a place of further centering resident voices, expressing another common view that the level of required equity could not be achieved within the current systems. In ensuring that the perspectives, needs, and goals of Cincinnati's most climate vulnerable residents are centered, it becomes important to discuss both the strengths and limitations of this program and what lessons should be carried over to other programs like it. The CAG process brings together communities and builds intergenerational bonds. it also gives a sense of purpose to many in aiding their desire to pass a better world on to their children. It enables community members to be heard and to interact with organizations and institutions with resources and power. Additionally, looking back at the results, we can see that the old phrase, "you don't know what you don't know," applies to community members and project team members alike. The CAG process filled in many of the missing pieces on equity and experiences for everyone involved. Along with strengths, though, there were plenty of limiting factors in the project. For those who felt better connected to those in power, there were also people who still felt like their priorities were not being heard. For those who found that the equity training gave them new, helpful perspectives, there were also participants who felt unprocessed discomfort from that portion of the training. Coordinators expressed a need for the neighborhoods to be involved much earlier in the process and stated that a lack of resources was a real challenge. For future iterations of the project, we anticipate that the city will need to increase their capacity in order to better communicate with residents. Many members of these communities were already engaged in attempts to communicate their needs to the city and show a strong desire to leave a legacy of action behind for their descendancy. We would also caution future team members on this project to remember to address the unprocessed emotions attached to individually felt inequities, so that CAG members aren't left with potentially distressing information and no support system with which to process it. This is still an ongoing project in the city, and the master's student I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation for her definition of climate equity is still working with Groundwork Ohio River Valley to evaluate the continued iterations of the project. While I only mentioned the first 3 neighborhoods in this presentation, Avondale, the neighborhoods of Beekman Corridor, Camp Washington, Carthage, Over the Rhine, and the West End have since been included, with over 225 residents participating and more neighborhoods soon to be added. You may have also noticed earlier that Sonia called out that she wanted community residents to be involved in the creation of the Green Cincinnati Plan earlier. That's because the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership also informed the Green Cincinnati Plan's community engagement efforts by hosting a series of climate-safe community events. These were single-night events hosted within CSN communities. So, to Sonia's point, the CSN did end up impacting city-level policy in the development of the Green Cincinnati Plan, but there is still the goal of having that impact start at the ground level in the future. To conclude, I want to visit a quote from Paul, a community member who summarized the primary purpose of creating climate-safe neighborhoods. "I don't know if inequity is accelerating climate change, but I think climate change is certainly accelerating inequity. I don't think that addressing climate change alone would automatically address equity, but I think addressing issues of equity can affect climate change. I'm personally not that interested in any solution that isn't founded in equity first, because let's save the planet, but who are we saving it for? If we're saving it for people who are already on top and benefit, it's not that interesting to me." Thank you. That's all I had for you.